Thanks for staying with Newsnight. Finance Minister Tito Mboweni has only been on the job for about 2 weeks, but he'll already be under pressure when he delivers the medium-term budget policy statement tomorrow. Mboweni faces a tough juggling act now with low growth, spiraling prices and lower revenue for government spending. So what's he likely to highlight in tomorrow's statement? ABSA economist Mielani Maluleke and Business Leadership South Africa CEO Bonang Mohale join me now in studio. Thank you so much for your time tonight, gentlemen. Firstly, the finance minister caused quite a stir last week, getting us all to believe that we can make some kind of contribution to his medium-term budget speech tomorrow by bringing in whatever recommendations and suggestions we have. But in reality, how much wiggle room does he have, given the fact that he's only been in office for 2 weeks, and we're told that much of this is decided well ahead of time? Let me begin with you, Mr. Mohale.
So I think let's start first by not underestimating the effect a leader can have in any organization. So when you have a leader of Minister Tito Mboweni's experience, stature, singularity of purpose, experience, a safe pair of hands, the markets like that, because what drives share price is rumor and speculation. So when you say good leader, already 50% of the work is done. Number two, he's probably got the second most difficult job in the world after that of the state president, because it comes in at a time when there's no money, when we're in a technical recession, when the GDP growth, at least in the last 5 years, has been lagging population growth. So in essence, the disposable income and purchasing power of South Africans has been going backwards.
Let's talk about that wage bill, which seems to be top of the list of the things that he may need to attend to tomorrow. What will he need to do in order to reduce it? And, it's also, before we get to the politics of it, perhaps, let's just begin with what can he do?
That's right. So the National Treasury has highlighted in the past, I think, and even in the budget review this year, that growth in the public sector wage deal has started to crowd out other areas of spending in government, and it's something that they wouldn't want to see in the long run. So there's certainly pressure to do something about it, and it certainly doesn't help that when you look at the public sector wage deal that was struck this year, it does imply that over the medium term, the government will have to spend an additional 30 billion rands above what it had actually budgeted for. So there's certainly pressure to do something about it, but at the same time, the president has made a commitment after the job summit that we're not going to see big retrenchment in the public sector. So it'll be interesting to see what other ideas Minister Mboweni has to deal with the growth in the public sector wage bill.
Where could he go, Ntate Mohale, if he were to really try and reduce that wage bill?
So first, I think as business we say he need to continue to root out and defeat state capture because of the quantum. 100 billion on average a year, that's just being siphoned off. It's too much. Many schools, many hospitals, many pit latrines could be eliminated. Number two, it's about reducing the government debt. We were very prudent. Rolihlahla Nelson Mandela's government debt to GDP ratio about 20%. Thabo Mbeki's one no more than 30%. Now we are 57%. The problem is that it's unsustainable. And at the time when the world is really in a difficult space. And this excludes guarantees to state-owned enterprises. And the third thing, I think, is to fix the state-owned enterprises. Because 6 of them together are bigger than most African countries' economies. And I used Eskom as an example, almost 500 billion borrowed, 350 government guarantees, and the math doesn't add up, so they have to borrow just to service the interest. The last two is to ensure that we reduce the bloated civil service. The cabinet of Mandela was 20, Thabo Mbeki was 23, this is now 37. So you can see what it has cost us with the past regime. Lots of people hired who do very little, and you pay them a lot. We knew that at some stage is going to catch up with us. Lastly, it's about ensuring that we change the narrative. Colombia is not killing any less drug lords, but it just changed the narrative and saying, look at the plans we are making to create peace with FARC, and because of that, 2 years ago, the Colombian president wins the Nobel Peace Prize.
Well, you know, the government did come out with a good story to tell a couple of years ago. That campaign didn't really, you know, do well in terms of changing the narrative. But just on the issue of, you know, cutting perhaps not just the wage bill by form of retrenchments, but also looking at that cabinet, as Mr. Mohale has pointed out, it also then becomes a political issue. Do you think that he would want to go there?
Yeah, so you're absolutely right. I think the decision on how to deal with the wage bill is ultimately a political decision, and I think we'll have to see if the leaders are willing to expend a bit of political capital to deal with it decisively, because I think there's very little doubt that they're going to encounter resistance on that from labor unions. But I think beyond that, there's also something really interesting, I think, to look forward to from this MTBPS, which is a little bit unusual. You know, a short while ago, the president came out and it outlined in a very broad way a stimulus plan. You know, he didn't really give the details in terms of what to expect, but I think he highlighted that the MTBPS could be that area that I think that provides the details in terms of what the stimulus plan could be. Because you spoke about this weak growth that we've had in South Africa, and I think it's one of the factors that will highlight that growth is actually going to be much weaker than what they expected in February. So it'll be interesting to see what sort of ideas come through from this stimulus package and what impact that could have on growth in the short term.
And it's not just the stimulus plan, it's also the infrastructure plan. What would business be looking in terms of specifics to really then buy in fully into the announcements that the president made?
But you see, when we say it's a political decision, we give public servants a free pass. Politics determine economics. When you are in a recession, there is no political economic. You want to get out of a recession. Therefore, it's about time that the state president puts the best interest of South Africa first, not the interest of the political party. Because if South Africa does well, the party will do well. By separating these, we are creating an artificial separation. So what business will be looking at is, instead of looking at government and say, create a conducive atmosphere in which we can thrive, give us regulatory stability and policy certainty, instead of looking at labor and say your strikes take too long, you demand too much money, business must come to the party with not 1,001 little things, maybe 4 or 5 big things that will move the dial in a significant way. So for us, without unpacking it, is how do we come up with probably big 6 burning platform issues. Let's be explicit about our support for land expropriation without compensation, because it's going to happen with or without us. Let's be clear about transformation, because this economy must be broadly reflective of the demographics. It can't be that 1% of the population owns half the income and more than 75% of the assets. It's not sustainable. Thirdly, we need to realize that we are in a crisis, a fiscal crisis, whether politicians like it or not. Let's use that word so that all of us tighten our belt. The last 3, it's about growth, and it must be an inclusive socio-economic growth. And then thereafter, we need to create jobs. And then lastly, we need to ensure that our education is fixed.
You know, this lower growth rate issue, it has, of course, an impact on the country. Let's speak just about some of the tangible impacts of this low growth that we've been experiencing.
Yeah, so you're absolutely right. I think one of the unfortunate outcomes of that is the inability to create the jobs that you're talking about. We've been battling on that front. But with respect to South Africa's fiscus in particular, one of the things that we struggle with when we're not growing is just the ability to collect tax revenues. Yeah. And it's one of the things that Minister Mboweni will have to talk about tomorrow, because they outlined plans in February, and given how weak growth has been, he will have to say what sort of impact that has had on tax collections. Now, I have to say that when you look at data for the first few months of the fiscal year, the numbers have looked sort of okay. So it looks unlikely that he's going to come out and table an MTBPS that is similar to what we had in 2017, where we had a big shortfall. But it's quite likely that tax revenue collections for this fiscal year will be a little bit lower than what the National Treasury expected at the start of the year. And ultimately, that also has the implications for how the National Treasury should be thinking about expenditure over the medium term.
And certainly when it comes to this expenditure that affects people on the ground, today we had Parliament this afternoon debating the issue of the VBS scandal. You talk about state-owned enterprises, and all of these are examples of how monies, in fact state monies in instances, has been basically looted. And what would you want the minister to actually say about this, given that it's officials that are within the system that are really the culprits behind all of this misspending?
You see, confidence matters. And I think what the Minister of Finance needs to do is to increase the tax morality. Because in the past, why would you pay your taxes when the commissioner has just paid 120,000 to a law firm to read whether he has been defamed? If that book was 400 pages thick, that's 600 rand per page. Imagine how many of our people would have taken out of poverty. Even our own government does not make our job easy. They spent 3.6 million rand on renovating 29 flats. But the paint and the wood for the decking is imported. At the time when the policy of this government is about reindustrialization, beneficiation, localization, and the creation of black industrialists. This is the government that buys the biggest locomotive order in the world, 64 locomotives, just by Transnet. You exclude PRASA, and they decide all the trains have been built by Union Carriage in Brakpan. No, these ones must go to China South Rail so that we can steal more money. So you can see that we've been cutting our nose to spite our face. Minister Tito Mboweni needs to talk to all of those issues so that the ordinary taxpayers say, I will pay my taxes willingly and gladly because I know it is being spent well. At the moment, this has been feeding at the trough. They've been eating like pigs. And Nugent says SARS has been spending money like water.
All right, let's leave it there for tonight. So certainly they have to walk the talk, but by the sounds of it, Tito Mboweni has his hands full.